what's happening with these changes isn't that precision's changing. It's just, it requires more collaboration than we're used to, right? It requires that the publisher and the advertiser share information in a way that they've never had to do so before, right? You can still be more specific. The publisher can still present extremely targeted campaigns, whether that's direct or programmatic, but you need to do the planning of the data and together in advance.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Today, I'm joined by both Adam Gellis and Rich Sobel. Adam Gellis has a new, I guess, really events and educational series called the Clean Room Primer, which is aptly named Clean Room Primer because a lot of folks are really early in their stages of evaluating whether they need a clean room and why. And Rich Sobel, who's been in the ad tech, martech category for a long time as well, and runs Marcato Solutions, which is primarily consultancy, I believe, Rich, but you can separately introduce yourself that way. So thanks, guys, for joining me. And if you want to first mention, Adam, what the catalyst was for you deciding that clean rooms needed a primer, and so how did you decide to go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, well, thanks, Kevin, for the time today. And so I'll just introduce myself briefly for those of folks in the audience that don't know me. I'm Adam Gellis. I'm the CEO of the B2B marketing company. And the impetus of the Clean Room Primer program is really just kind of born out of a group of industries folks that were talking about clean rooms and the role that they have in kind of a privacy first kind of world that we're going to start marketing in. And so really it was actually an impetus was really Rich, frankly. He introduced this to a group of us and started talking about kind of what he's seeing with marketers relative to understanding clean rooms. And, I think collectively we saw there was a knowledge gap, frankly, at the industry level between kind of what they are, how they work, what are the use cases, and kind of and that that was the impetus of us creating this kind of ad hoc group to kind of facilitate the collective wisdom to help educate the industry. And Rich can introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin and Adam again. Rich Sobel, as Kevin said, I run Marcato Solutions, which is a consultancy focused on the strategic use of data and technology, which is a mouthful. But basically, I help people figure out how to use technology and data to improve their business, particularly in marketing and advertising. So a little bit of a different bent. Clean rooms have been a topic that have been really busy in the industry the last, I would say, year. But my technology experience predates my advertising experience. And so I've been dealing with clean rooms for, decades at this point. The concept of what a clean room can do is really interesting, where you match data sets while protecting privacy. Moving that into the ad world with everything that we've seen with third-party cookie deprecation, all the privacy regulations that are popping up, both legally and from an operating system and a browser standpoint, there's so many changes. It obviously makes sense to kind of rethink how data is working. And so the clients that I've been working with on the brand side and on the publisher side have really been struggling with how to make adjustments, and Clean Room has been one of the big kind of leaps forward for them in terms of trying to address those challenges. So it's been an interesting couple of years, particularly the last couple of months. It's just become such a big topic. I think everyone's been putting out some material around it, whether it was eMarketer, whether it was Forrester, and as Adam said, a number of us kind of insiders were just chatting in a happy hour once and complaining about, how challenging it was to have a conversation around technology that's so complicated. And so, Adam got us together and kind of marshaled, participation from a number of the leading platforms. And, we went into the approach with what would make early conversations easier. right? Like, how do we get started with these conversations? There are a number of brands and publishers using the technology pretty aggressively, but they are far and few between. And so most of the time, at least when I go in to have a conversation around a clean room, it's 3 or 4 conversations before we're actually talking about what the clean room can do. And that's no shame, right? Like, I have tons of experience in the space. I wouldn't expect people to have the same level of experience. So what could we do as a group of professionals to help make these conversations a little bit easier, a little bit faster, and give people a little bit of not really homework, but a little bit of grounding before entering into conversations.
That's really great. I noticed you decided it required a roadshow, right? So you could have obviously done entirely virtual education and entirely virtual conversations around the power of clean rooms and how they're being used, but you sort of chose to take it out on the road. Now, was it initially just sort of you did one and then you decided, okay, one event turned into a roadshow, or was it planned as a roadshow right out of the gate?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. We planned the initiative. There's kind of 2 initiatives happening at the same time. One was the primer itself, which is a 24-page white paper. It's kind of the pre-101 for clean rooms for marketers, publishers, platforms, and agencies to better understand use cases and kind of some taxonomy and definitional stuff to explain how clean rooms work in the context of marketing and advertising. And then the roadshow itself was just the impetus kind of a couple of our kind of key, group members who felt it was important to speak in the street, so to speak, to have conversations face to face with folks. Obviously, because of COVID, the average any business related industry was, we were lack of, there was enough virtual stuff. We felt that a roadshow was a great venue or a great distribution platform to get to get the message out, get the primer in the hands of the folks that would be applying it to their day-to-day business decisions. I think the other side of it was that as a group, we're an ad hoc group, right? So everybody's we will have day jobs, I guess, but I think it's good to note that a lot of the companies are involved, and there'll be more as we go for sure. That they all stepped up to some capacity to help make the activities free to registrants, and so I think to some extent that's very helpful in the context of making sure the message gets told to the folks that are looking at clean rooms as a solution to help with data collaboration.
Well, I was lucky enough to have Matt Kilmartin from Habu on earlier as an e-marketing association podcast guest. So I learned a lot about clean rooms from him, which is really getting it from the horse's mouth in that case. And it was fascinating to me, some of the use cases that were talked about. I was lucky enough to attend your event in New York City recently as well. And Matt was one of the panelists up there along with some others. So do you feel like there were some primary takeaways from that New York City event that people listening now should really think about as it relates to clean rooms, in particular the power of the clean room, given increasing privacy regulations and the necessity to sort of keep the power of targeting and data without infringing on people's rights?
Yeah, I'll start on this one. I think, because I moderated the panel between Matt from Habu, we had folks from Biofram, someone from InfoSum, and someone from Claravine. And so to me, what was most striking in the conversation was how absolute all of the platforms were in needing to make sure that the plan for the technology was done well in advance of bringing it on board. Unlike a lot of ad tech that we've seen bring on in the last couple of years, 7-8 years or so, you can be a little bit more ad hoc with the technology because it is such a baseline kind of transactionally oriented technology. As you get into MarTech, it becomes a lot more complicated. But data technology is is like an even more difficult layer beyond that. So, we talked about examples from L'Oreal, from Disney, from Unilever. These are companies who spent probably 6 to 9 months just figuring out what they wanted to do with their data before they even began bringing in technology like clean rooms. And so that was really striking. And as someone who spends a lot of time in strategy, figuring out plans, figuring out what the art of the possible is, it was really heartening to hear. But also, it's very challenging when companies really struggle with that, and struggle with trying to understand what they want to do, because business is not academic. As much as we all have folks who've gone for MBAs and spend a lot of time with it, every business is unique and different, and knowing what you're doing with your data, it can, a clean room can support marketing and advertising, which is what we've really focused on with our effort, but it can do a lot of other things in terms of customer data around product development and, for in-store experiences, what those are like, what e-com experiences are like. There's a lot of versatility to what the technology can do once you start merging data sets in a privacy-friendly way. And so being clear about what are all the things that you want to do, or at least a sample of those things to get started before you start really, really spending time with platforms, because it is very use case driven.
Both at the event and just now, you mentioned a few big brands. Some brands have both a publishing or broadcasting footprint, but also potentially a product and consumer-centric footprint as well. And, I think part of the evolution of a lot of these technologies is that the big guys get in first, particularly because they're also the ones that regulators are most likely to go after first if there is somebody who sort of steps over the line with their use of their data. But eventually sort of things move into mid-market, and eventually things trickle down even to the SMB market. But SMBs haven't even gotten around to CDPs and first-party data collection yet, whereas a lot of the folks that you mentioned have been very cognizant of the value of first-party data for a while. And so do you see there being an evolution where is it already moving into the mid-market, or is it really just the power players at this point who are starting to think about how do the clean rooms coexist with our CDPs? What kinds of data do we really want to append on in a privacy safe environment? And then what are we going to do with that?
It's been interesting. I think anyone who's consumer facing, has an opportunity. I think a lot of, Shopify has been trying to help a lot of the smaller brands that they support get into this space and try to sponsor some technology solutions around that. Because, from a scale perspective, for a small business who spends, $2 million in direct marketing over the course of a year, and, their revenue is in the, tens of millions, $1 million investment in a clean room on its own, not that it would necessarily cost that, isn't the right direction to approach, right? Like that's not the right way to think about it. But if you're able to take advantage of a multi-tenant structure that someone like Spotify can offer with a LiveRamp or a Habu or an InfoSum or an Oracle or so on and so forth, like you can be a lot more, you can take advantage of that economy of scale a little bit more. So it's nice to see that some of these, e-com platforms are kind of leaning in to help, because the technology is really powerful, because you can't market in this world anymore without engaging in the walled garden experiences, right? You can't market without going into social platforms, right? And social platforms are really restricted about how you can access that data and how you as a brand can understand what your customers are doing on their platform. Clean rooms help you understand that, right? It's a privacy-friendly way of working with the data, a little bit in the traditional database marketing way, but you're doing it in a much more real-time, much more dynamic approach. So you can do things like audit campaign measurement, using real specific data. You can talk about, getting very granular from an audience perspective, whether that's planning, whether that's targeting, whether that's measurement, whether that's just, business planning, et cetera. There's a lot of things that you can do once you start to merge data sets. And so, it's been it's such a powerful tool that, letting it open up has been interesting to watch.
I would say from the publisher's perspective, just like you have marketers that are, the Procters and Gambles and then all the way through to single brands. On the publisher side, you have the same stratification. And I think that the smart publishers who understand the value of first-party data will put that into their strategic plan for their ad products and their customer management, that in 2023, they better get their act together on their first-party data strategy. And then as that, obviously the bigger publishers do that, especially in television, especially in CTV, it's a big piece of their kind of go-to-market. But as other publishers start seeing the power of being able to collaborate with brands at scale, by leveraging their own internal under the hood first party data, along with an advertiser partner having their own first party data in a clean room in a data safe way, then they'll start seeing the power of how that helps, not only monetize their own assets, their own inventory better, but it'll also help them better understand how that customer interactions are looking down the waterfall in terms of how that's creating business value for their key advertising partners. And I will think that right now it's early days for all this stuff, right? And so it's like we're in the early, the old bell curve. We're in the early adopters. We're kind of starting to slowly hit kind of the first group of kind of the next tranche in the 5-point bell curve. And I think that's the right place to be. And because the lessons that the Proctors of the world or the NBCs of the world learn are the lessons that can be that can be replicated by others down in the smaller size businesses.
Yeah, one interesting thing that I did in my brain, which may or may not have been the right way to think about it, but when I first heard about the clean rooms and started to think about some of the use case scenarios, I hearkened back to the direct mail processes of the merge purge, right? Because you basically had a data owner, right, and you had another data owner, two different data owners. One was the one was the brand, and one was the list owner often, right? And so they wanted to be able to work together, right? But they needed a third party to do the merge purge to understand that the brand didn't have to rebuy an existing customer for a mailing list, right? But they still wanted to be able to get at the list, right? And so they used an independent sort of Switzerland entity, right, to do the merge purge. And then they both agreed, okay, so yeah, we had a 16% overlap on this list. I'll buy the leftovers, right? And so from that perspective, if I sort of put the list owner in the publisher seat, right, I sort of thought about them as that construct, and I thought about the brand owner as the one, hey, I want to reach new customers, but I may also want to reach my existing customers in a different way, right? And I thought about, okay, well, maybe the clean room is one way that we find a way to accomplish that in a sort of neutral way, right? And of course, privacy protecting neutral way, which is another layer that didn't exist back in the direct mail merge purge days, but exists now to a great extent. Was that like a good way to think about it, or was I really only scratching the surface of really what a clean room can do?
Yeah, I would say that that's pretty much exactly how it works. It's just, the merge purge process would be several weeks, right? It was a long, lengthy process to do those things. Now you can do it in a matter of hours, right? You have the data matching, you have the queries that run. It can all happen in near real time, right? It can happen very quickly, and you can do it repeatedly as opposed to having to do it like every 6 months. You can do it every week. You could do it every 2 weeks, every month. So there's a lot more versatility with the technology, but the concept, as you described, is basically the same concept.
Yeah, and I think there's another big kind of industry trend that's creating this, which is the deprecation of third-party cookies, plus with tracking being turned off in certain devices. Like marketers who want to understand the return of their ad investment, they need to use tools like clean rooms to better understand the overlap between that audience and those affinities they're looking for in their audience and their customers, right? And so now when you see like large, retailers that have their own kind of media networks under their own hood, they also have to, going to have to, share some of that with some of the other manufacturers in their base of OEMs that are selling through their retail networks. And so this is a super privacy safe way to do that. And then, if you only can see, 2/3 of the world because of certain technology changes on the consumer side, then you're missing a large part of the market that you're incorrectly analyzing. And so, that's the other part of that conversation too.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the fascinating things that I've sort of seen happen is that, the loss of precision with regards to targeting, both from the perspective of targeting, but also from the perspective of measurement, right? Obviously, is hitting the market asymmetrically, right? You had like Apple Safari, and then you had, IDFA, and then you have the cookie deprecation hitting in different pockets. And yet, you for marketers to feel confident that their marketing is working, right? You sort of need a way to glue everything back together. And I think that's part of what the ecosystem is struggling with, right? In the meantime, you end up with these winners and losers, right? So because like the ones who still had the ability to give you precision, they're like getting a huge tailwind from it, right? CTV, because that shrink wrap agreement that you agreed to when you turned your cable box on said, oh, we were allowed to know that you were you, right? Whereas on your iPhone, we don't know you or you. Well, Apple knows you or you, but there's nobody, they won't tell anybody else that you or you, right? And so you have these weird asymmetries in the data. Do you feel like at some point it's all going to be, settle into, everything is going to be hashed, everything is going to be sort of where only the clean room, anonymously can glue people together? Or do you think there'll still be a lot of channels where marketers will be able to say, well, at least in this channel, I still get one-to-one?
It's interesting because I've had conversations with a number of brands who don't have great first party data, right? They don't have direct consumer relationships. And so they struggle with, well, what do I do? How do I approach this? The technology, I need to respond to these challenges. A clean room is a way to start doing that and to start helping. But, if you're a marketer and you are 100% CPA oriented, it's all going to net itself out at the end of the day, right? We all know those games work. It's interesting that you use the term precision, because what's happening with these changes isn't that precision's changing. It's just, it requires more collaboration than we're used to, right? It requires that the publisher and the advertiser share information in a way that they've never had to do so before, right? You can still be more specific. The publisher can still present extremely targeted campaigns, whether that's direct or programmatic, but you need to do the planning of the data and together in advance. And so that's where a clean room really becomes powerful, is that you can start to do those things and make adjustments so that you're not just trafficking, an IO and letting it run and seeing what happens. You're making the adjustment, you're being precise about what you're targeting, but you can change that because you have a cohabitated data set in a safe environment where neither side sees everything, but they see enough that they can make decisions together.
Do you anticipate that on the platform side that some of them will become more willing to let the third parties, like the clean rooms, actually be the glue that holds everything together? Because obviously in the case of Apple, for example, to my knowledge, they're not allowing for even anonymized hashed data to escape from their walled garden, right? And so now other publishers, even gigantic publishers, are saying, okay, well, one of the ways for us to maximize the value of our first party data while preserving the value of the first party data is to allow it to be in a clean room where we can all benefit from the increased level of targeting and the increased ability to measure, right? So do you feel like there'll be pressure on some of these platforms who are resisting, letting there be a independent Switzerland to sort of play in the neutral party zone?
Apple's an interesting case. They obviously are pioneering a lot of privacy changes in anticipation of legal changes that may or may not be coming. What's been interesting is they're also, they've sputtered and started multiple attempts at advertising businesses. And we're all anticipating the next round of that to come again. And if that's the case, the challenge that they had in the past was they didn't really want to adhere to what advertisers wanted from a measurement perspective. However, if they're going to go into this approach, this is actually a very safe way, because a clean room still requires you to manage opt-in, right? You can only use the data in compliant ways, and the platforms kind of require that as part of their agreement. So, working with Apple is something that will eventually come, but it's more interesting, I think, will be Google and Meta and Amazon, who've kind of been the leaders in the ad space, right, in the last couple of years, especially. with Amazon kind of joining their ranks. Google has a version of a clean room, but they just announced that they're looking into partnerships, right? And they've announced their partnership approach. We're expecting something similar with Meta once Google kind of proves out, the playbook on that front. And Amazon, I mean, they make most of their money from a cloud service, right? And so, being able to interact with other clouds is native to what a cloud business does. And so, while we haven't seen necessarily the adoption of collaboration, I think we're all kind of expecting it to play out, especially now that Google, who has been the longest, affront to kind of sharing their data, is now opening up options using Ads Data Hub in partnership with some of these clean room platforms. And so that'll be great to see, because you can't advertise without advertising on Google. You can't really advertise much without advertising a little bit with some of the meta properties. So opening those doors up really allows for extensibility, which then opens up the doors for other publishers and other brands to kind of really kind of lean into this more privacy forward approach. And in many cases, using a clean room to do it.
Well, we'll be watching that pretty carefully to see how that evolves, because if the clean room concept achieves critical mass, it makes it more powerful for everyone. To that question, or to that concept of sort of critical mass for the clean rooms in general, has there been sort of already a move towards standardization of the anonymized ID? Obviously, LiveRamp has its ID. There have been hashed email addresses in a variety of different hash formats for a while, but there's differences in opinion as to how privacy compliant even a hashed email address is, and the platforms, of course, independently for themselves, have been using hashed emails to create their custom audiences, or whichever other term you use for the flavor of the custom audience in the different platforms. So do you feel like that we've reached this point where we're sort of starting to standardize around the anonymized identifier, so that at least different parties can agree to use common ones, or do you still feel like that hasn't settled out yet?
I don't think it's settled out personally. I think the challenges with CPRA in particular, really question the use of hashed email, and we're kind of watching just previously similar to the previous question, like, how is this playing out? What's been interesting to watch is, instead of requiring an identifier to kind of be the bridge, even LiveRamp is saying that their ID is not necessarily the bridge between partners in a clean room. It is a service that they can provide, but it is no longer a mandatory part of their matching process, which I think is a huge step forward. With so many identity graphs being available commercially, and just restrictions of privacy, this brand can use me, but this brand can't, right? Like, that level of complexity, matching to a common identifier, creates, I think, more challenges than it should. And so, being able to merge on deterministic data, but also using a slightly kind of integrated probabilistic model using that deterministic data, really allows you to be a little bit more flexible, right? Because, and I always like to use myself as an example, I'm Rich and Richard on different files. My mailing address has multiple variations because of the way my building was built, right? So, and then, multiple email addresses, et cetera. If you go down all these roads with different data sets, if you're trying to match to a single common identifier, you only get so much of a percentage of a match. Then you're bringing yet another match into that. Why not take the identifier out, try to match in the middle? And if you need multiple identifiers, multiple graphs, you can buy those because they're all available.
Generally, there's been sort of a different level of acceptability with regards to, let's say, PII, for lack of a better term, in a B2B environment versus a B2C environment. And so in the United States in particular, it's been much more acceptable to know a whole lot about a person's business identity as it relates to targeting them than potentially moving into that same level of data in their personal identity and their buying preferences, et cetera. So do you see clean rooms as being more valuable in a B2C environment, or do you think they'll end up being really valuable in both B2B and B2C?
I'll say from the B2B side of the house, which is my neck of the woods, there will be a need for clean rooms, especially for large business to business brands that have millions of records that they have to work with, right? So as much as we talk about Ford as a consumer marketer, it's also a business marketer when it comes to fleet sales and its Ford Pro lines. And so it's dealing with millions and millions of companies and the executives that work at those companies that make business decisions. And so when you think about overlaying and keeping privacy compliant, overlaying what Ford needs to achieve in terms of corporate profiles and individual executive profiles for like an ABM strategy, they will need to employ a clean room to map that to LinkedIn and map that to Bloomberg or the other publishers on the business to business side. And just one thing I want to clarify: the thing about clean rooms that's fascinating to me as a marketer is it's not one size fits all, and it never will be, because it's two companies collaborating on how to in the confines of their own privacy terms and conditions, et cetera, and wherever they're operating governs the legislative aspect, that it's really a one-to-one relationship. So what ends up happening is the business rules that come up in that data collaboration agreement is what governs that clean room and how it functions and how it works and what data goes inside the bucket, so to speak, and what doesn't get incorporated. So I think that as we, in the B2B space, to answer your question, like that the B2B publishers are far more advanced when it comes to first party data than the B2C customers, save maybe CTV. But it is a piece where that, bigger B2B brands will really absolutely need to use clean rooms in the future to go to market. And they're going to have to, especially with kind of the laws coming down the road. And so, B2B marketers think that they get away with a lot, but at the some of this, because it's a professional identifier, right, as opposed to an individual identifier. But the reality is that all this stuff needs to be, all this stuff needs to be working for a B2B marketer to go to market and at scale, especially for the large brands.
Great. Well, I urge those folks who are still early in their learning curves on clean rooms, which I think probably is everybody, including myself, pay attention to what's going on within the Clean Room Primer initiative, and reach out to you guys and continue to watch what content you come out with, as well as obviously all of the co-producers of your content, because they're inventing it as they go along, right? So if great stuff ends up being invented, they're going to either have invented or know about it. So I'll certainly be watching you very carefully.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks so much for joining.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.